Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
After finishing my degree in environmental science, I landed a job with an international conservation organization. They needed someone to oversee a reforestation project in a small South American country, and I jumped at the opportunity. It was supposed to be a 2-year assignment, but 2 years turned into 5, and before I knew it, I was calling this place home. The weather was a dream come true, perfect year-round temperatures that made air conditioning unnecessary. Open windows were all you needed to keep your living space cool and fresh. I fell in love with the culture, the food, and eventually with a local guy who worked as a translator for our organization. We got married in a small ceremony overlooking the rainforest, and soon after, I found out I was pregnant. Everything was going smoothly until Easter week of 1993. I was 7 months pregnant, and an unusual heat wave hit our area. The breezeless days made my pregnancy even more uncomfortable, but I was managing. That is, until the barking started. It began on a Tuesday. At first, I thought it was just some neighborhood dogs getting overexcited, but as the hours stretched into days, it became clear this wasn't normal. The constant barking was driving me insane. Between the heat, my swollen ankles, and the lack of sleep, I was at my wit's end. After 3 days of this torture, I decided to investigate. I waddled from floor to floor in our apartment building, following the sound. When I reached the source of the noise, I found a group of neighbors already there, banging on a heavy-duty security door. I asked the neighbors what was going on. One of them explained that the dogs had been barking non-stop for days, and they suspected the owner had left them alone. Another neighbor added that they had been trying to get someone to answer but without success. I joined their efforts, but it was useless. The door was like a fortress, metal bars sliding into the top, bottom, and sides when locked. We couldn't even hear movement inside, just the relentless barking. Days went by and the situation didn't improve. I was losing my mind from the lack of sleep and the constant noise. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. One night I got into the elevator with a carton of eggs. I rode up to the offending apartment's floor and without even stepping out, I chucked the eggs at the door. It felt good to do something, anything, to express my frustration. This went on for a few more days, but the satisfaction of egging the door wore off quickly. The dogs were still barking and I was still not sleeping. It was time to escalate. I went to the hardware store and bought a tube of heavy-duty glue. That night I rode the elevator up again, but this time I stepped out. I approached the door and squirted the entire contents of the glue tube into the lock. Had I gone too far? Maybe. But in my sleep-deprived, hormone-addled state, it felt justified. A couple of days later, I heard a commotion in the hallway. I peeked out to see the dog owner, a middle-aged man, struggling with his key at the door. He couldn't get it to turn in the lock. The dog owner expressed his frustration, wondering aloud what was wrong with the lock. He kept trying, getting more frustrated by the minute. Eventually, he had to call the fire department. I watched from my peephole as they arrived, assessed the situation, and realized there was no way to open the lock. The firefighter informed the owner that they would have to break down the door as there was no other way in. The owner protested, mentioning the high cost of the door. The firefighter apologized but explained that it was either breaking down the door or not getting into the apartment. What followed was hours of noise as they used pickaxes to destroy the concrete around the doorframe. The bars embedded in the walls, ceiling, and floor made it an enormous task. By the time they managed to pull the door out, the entire entrance was a mess of rubble and twisted metal. As I watched the owner survey the damage, looking shell-shocked, I started to feel a twinge of remorse. Had I taken things too far? But then I overheard his conversation with one of the neighbors. The neighbor confronted the owner about his absence, mentioning that the dogs had been barking non-stop for over a week. The owner casually replied that he had gone on vacation for Easter, leaving the dogs with plenty of food and water. When the neighbor expressed shock at him leaving the dogs alone for 10 days in the bathroom, The owner dismissed their concerns, stating that the dogs were fine and that he did this all the time. My remorse evaporated instantly. This man had left two large dogs chained up in a tiny bathroom for 10 days while he went on vacation. The noise, the sleepless nights, the stress, it all paled in comparison to the cruelty he'd inflicted on those poor animals. As he argued with animal control officers who'd been called to the scene, I closed my door, finally looking forward to a quiet night's sleep. The next day, I heard through the grapevine that he'd been fined heavily for animal neglect and that the dogs had been rescued and taken to a shelter. The apartment building was peaceful after that. The owner moved out, unable to afford the repairs to his door and unwilling to face his neighbor's judgment. I gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 months later in a much quieter, more restful environment. Looking back, I don't regret what I did. Sometimes you have to take drastic measures to right a wrong, especially when innocent creatures are suffering. And if my actions taught that inconsiderate man a lesson about responsibility and empathy, well, that's just the cherry on top. I was 7 months pregnant, and my cravings were driving me crazy. My husband was out of town for work, so I decided to brave the crowded store alone. Being pregnant isn't easy, especially in the later months. My back was killing me and my feet were swollen, but I needed those pickles and ice cream, so off I went. When I arrived at the market, I was pleasantly surprised by how kind the staff was. A young man at the entrance offered me a sanitized cart and even wiped down the handle for me. As I waddled through the aisles, another employee asked if I needed help reaching anything on the higher shelves. I was touched by their thoughtfulness, and it made my shopping experience so much easier. Little did I know someone else wasn't happy about the attention I was getting. As I was checking out, I heard a commotion behind me. A woman was arguing with one of the employees. She was complaining loudly about the special treatment I was receiving just because I was pregnant, while the employee was trying to explain that they help all customers equally. I tried to ignore the situation and focus on bagging my groceries, but I could feel the tension building. The cashier gave me an apologetic look and tried to speed up the process. She apologized for the disturbance and told me my total. I had just finished paying when I felt a hard shove from behind. Before I could react, something slammed into my belly with surprising force. I stumbled backward, clutching my stomach in shock and pain. I exclaimed in surprise and turned to see the angry woman from earlier, her face red with rage. She had actually rammed her cart into my pregnant belly. The woman taunted me about liking the special treatment. I was stunned. The pain in my abdomen was sharp, and I felt dizzy. The cashier rushed around the counter to steady me and called for someone to call an ambulance. The woman seemed to realize what she had done. Her face paled, but instead of apologizing, she tried to make a run for it. That's when the manager appeared, blocking her path. He confronted her about her actions, and she tried to claim it was an accident. The manager informed her that he had seen everything on the security camera and had already called the police. The woman's demeanor changed instantly. She started crying and begging, pleading with the manager not to involve the police. She insisted she didn't mean to hurt me, but the manager was unmoved and told her to save her excuses for the police. As this was happening, I was lowered onto a chair, still clutching my belly. The pain was intense, and I was terrified for my baby. The paramedics arrived quickly, followed closely by the police. While I was being examined, I could hear the manager giving his statement to the officers. He described in detail how the woman had purposely rammed her cart into me, explaining that she was upset about me getting help from the staff. The paramedics decided I needed to go to the hospital for a thorough checkup. As they were helping me onto the stretcher, I saw the police arresting the woman, reading her rights to her. The woman was wailing now, begging for mercy, but no one was having it. The manager approached me as I was being wheeled out, apologizing for the incident and assuring me that they would take care of my groceries and the bill. I managed a weak thank you before being loaded into the ambulance. The ride to the hospital was nerve-wracking. All I could think about was my baby. What if that crazy woman had caused serious harm? At the hospital, I went through a series of tests and examinations. The hours felt like days as I waited for the results. Finally, the doctor came in with a smile on her face and delivered the good news. My baby was fine with normal movement and heartbeat. She explained that I might have some bruising, but there were no serious complications. The relief I felt was indescribable. I burst into tears, overwhelmed by emotion. My baby was safe. Over the next few days, I learned more about what happened to the woman who attacked me. She was charged with assault and battery of a pregnant woman, which carried a hefty penalty. The market security footage provided irrefutable evidence of her actions. In the end, the woman pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to jail time and ordered to pay restitution for my medical bills. I heard she also had to undergo anger management therapy. I recovered from the ordeal and went on to deliver a healthy baby 2 months later. The experience was terrifying, but it showed me how many good people there are in the world, ready to stand up against injustice. I grew up in Western Canada, and I always had a fascination with different cultures and languages. That's what led me to study German in college. Little did I know it would become such a crucial part of my life. I met my husband during my semester abroad in Germany. He was charming, funny, and we clicked instantly. After graduation, he moved to Canada to be with me. We got married 3 years ago and started our family. Life was good, but the rising cost of living in Canada was making things tough. When I got pregnant with our second child, we decided it was time for a change. My husband suggested moving back to his hometown in Germany. The idea of raising our kids in a different culture excited me, and the lower cost of living seemed like a great opportunity. So, we packed up our lives and moved to Hanover. At first, everything seemed perfect. We found a lovely house and I was eager to bond with my husband's family. But things took a turn pretty quickly. It started subtly. During our visits to my in-laws, I catch snippets of German conversation that didn't sound too friendly. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. But as time went on, it became clear they were talking about me. One day, I overheard a conversation where my mother-in-law criticized my clothing choices, suggesting I dressed like a teenager. My sister-in-law joined in, making fun of my hair and implying I didn't take care of it. I was hurt, but I didn't want to cause trouble. I kept quiet, hoping things would improve. They didn't. The comments about my appearance continued, and when my pregnancy started to show, they had even more to say. In another overheard conversation, my mother-in-law commented on how big I was getting, implying I was overeating. My sister-in-law chimed in with a rude joke about my diet. I couldn't take it anymore. I talked to my husband about it, hoping he could help. I explained to him that his family had been saying hurtful things about me in German, and I didn't think they knew I could understand them. When he asked for specifics, I told him about the criticisms of my clothes, hair, and pregnancy weight. My husband was shocked and promised to talk to them. True to his word, my husband must have said something because the comments stopped. For a while, things were peaceful. Then our daughter was born. We named her after my family's tradition, not realizing it would cause such an uproar. My in-laws were livid. My mother-in-law expressed her shock at our choice of name, pointing out its unfortunate meaning in German. I tried to explain that it was a family name and important to me, but she insisted that people would think we were strange. I stood my ground, but it created a rift. I avoided visiting them for a while, focusing on bonding with my baby and dealing with my postpartum depression. Then came my mother-in-law's birthday. I didn't want to go, but my husband insisted it would be good for us. I reluctantly agreed. As soon as we arrived, chaos ensued. Everyone wanted to hold the baby, which made me incredibly anxious. I politely declined letting them look, but not touch. During dinner, I overheard my sister-in-law talking to my mother-in-law in German. They criticized me for not letting anyone hold the baby, calling me selfish. My mother-in-law agreed, saying I had always been difficult. Then my sister-in-law went too far, calling me a fat, ugly hockey addict. That was the last straw. I stood up abruptly, causing everyone to fall silent and look at me. I confronted them, revealing that I had understood every word they had said about me since the beginning. I listed their insults about my appearance, parenting, and the names they had called me, demanding that it end. The table erupted in chaos. My mother-in-law, red with embarrassment and anger, accused me of speaking disrespectfully in their home. I fired back, pointing out their behind the back insults despite my efforts to be part of the family. My sister in law weakly tried to defend herself by saying they didn't know I could understand them. I challenged this excuse, asking if that made their behavior acceptable. My husband, who had been stunned into silence, finally spoke up. He expressed his shame in his family's behavior and announced our departure, stating that we wouldn't return until they could treat me with respect. We left amid a flurry of apologies and excuses, but I knew the damage was done. In the weeks that followed, my in-laws tried to apologize, but I wasn't ready to forgive just yet. My husband and I focused on our little family, finding happiness in our new home without the cloud of judgment hanging over us. I knew that one day we might rebuild those relationships, but for now, I was content knowing that I had found my voice and my strength in a foreign land. Our family has a special place on Shroon Lake in New York. My great-grandparents bought it in the 1950s, and we've kept it ever since. As a kid, I spent every summer there. I learned to fish with my dad, roasted marshmallows, and played in the lake. When I grew up, the cabin became a place to relax from college stress and later, my busy job in the city. It's so peaceful there. Our cabin is simple but feels like home. The wooden dock my dad and uncles built 20 years ago is where we've had most of our fun. We tie up our boats there, jump into the water, and enjoy the sun. It was perfect until a new neighbor showed up. 3 months ago, a woman moved into the house on the hill above us. We tried to be friendly at first. My dad even took her some of my mom's blueberry muffins, but she's been nothing but trouble from the start. First, she complained about the noise from our cars. My cousin and I like to work on them on weekends. Then she said we drive too fast on the road even though we're always careful. The worst part? She wants to put her own dock right next to ours. Our dock has been in the same spot for 20 years with no problems. But this woman says we're 2 feet and 10 inches over her property line. She's threatening to remove our dock if we don't do what she wants. When my dad told me about the meeting he had with her, he was really upset. He couldn't believe she thought she owned the whole lake. I asked if she had any proof about the property line. Dad said she wouldn't get anyone official to check it out. Mom suggested we get our own survey done to be sure. Dad didn't want to spend money on what he thought was a silly claim. I agreed with Mom, saying it would help us prove we're right if we are. Dad was worried about what might happen if the survey didn't go our way. I told him we should take it one step at a time. He agreed, and we found someone to check the property lines. On the day of the survey, I was really nervous. I watched the surveyor work and waited for the results. He said he had good and bad news. The good news was that our dock wasn't over the line by as much as the neighbor said. The bad news was that it was over by about 8 inches. The surveyor said we might have to move the dock, but because it had been there so long, we might have a case to keep it. He suggested talking to a lawyer. While we were talking, the neighbor came down the hill, looking smug. She asked when we were going to move our ugly dock. I told her about the survey results. She didn't care and said she wanted the dock gone in a week or she'd remove it herself. I tried to make a deal with her. I said we'd move our dock if she agreed to have the whole lakefront surveyed, and if any part of her house was on someone else's land, she'd have to fix it right away. This surprised her, and she left without agreeing. After that, I suggested we talk to all the neighbors about doing a big survey of the whole lakefront. Everyone agreed, and the woman had to go along with it. Surprisingly, the survey showed that the woman's new house was actually on protected wetlands. She had to pay big fines and move her house, which cost way more than if she just left our dock alone. In the end, we did move our dock, but only by 8 inches. We learned how important it is for neighbors to stick together against bullies. As for the woman, she's been much quieter since then and doesn't bother us about property lines anymore. This experience taught us a lot. We realized that sometimes standing up for what's right means working together as a community. It also showed us that being fair and following the rules is important for everyone, not just some people. Our cabin and its dock are still our special place. Now, when we sit on that dock, we appreciate it even more. We think about how we protected it and how our whole lake community came together. It reminds us that home isn't just about property lines. It's about the memories we make and the people we share them with. Every summer, as we gather for barbecues, boat rides, and stargazing, we're thankful for our little piece of paradise. And we're especially grateful for the neighbors who stood by us. Together, we keep our lake community a peaceful and friendly place for everyone to enjoy. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.